And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Glad you're with us. An exciting guest today who knows a lot about a lot.
Indeed. Stephen Jones is our guest today, a lawyer whose home base is in Enid, but Stephen is a nationally known lawyer, probably as well known nationally as he is locally for many things he's done. He's represented a wide variety of people in both civil and criminal matters, had an interesting long career. Perhaps the one that our viewers would know most about would be his representation of Timothy McVeigh in the bombing case.
An intriguing person, always interesting to visit with. Stephen Jones coming up today on The Verdict. Stay with us.
The day Chesapeake chose to focus its entire drilling program on American soil was a day of victory for this country, because our economy, our energy security, and our environment all win. Finding natural gas right here in the U.S. instead of in foreign countries puts dollars in the pockets of American landowners. It also pours tax dollars into city and state treasuries to improve schools and communities. And of course, drilling here creates jobs here. What's more, Chesapeake rewards ambition in the next generations with scholarship dollars, school mentors, and role models. In just a few years, we've built the nation's #1 drilling program, delivering clean-burning energy that brings independence and prosperity home to our neighbors and our nation. Chesapeake. Natural gas wins the day.
Hi, this is James Garner.
Hi, this is Reba McEntire.
Hi, this is Johnny Bench.
Hi, I'm Barry Switzer.
Hey everybody, this is Vince Gill.
Welcome to my home state of Oklahoma,
where we'll be celebrating 100 years of statehood
in 2007.
Our strength is our people, and the 2,100 Oklahomans from the Cox Communications family are proud to be part of Oklahoma's story. Cox and Oklahoma, true partners.
Happy birthday, Oklahoma.
The Cox Channel, following your favorite teams all season long.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Today we're very honored to have a longtime friend of mine from law school and thereafter, Stephen Jones. Stephen is one of, if not the best known lawyer in Oklahoma, both locally and nationally. He graduated from the University of Texas Undergraduate School and the University of Oklahoma College of Law thereafter. He's been in Oklahoma practicing law in and out of Oklahoma, but his home base has been Oklahoma since the mid-60s. He served as a legislative assistant to then Congressman Donald Rumsfeld, worked as an assistant both to Congressman Richard Nixon and Nelson Rockefeller. He came to Oklahoma, became the general counsel of the ACLU in Oklahoma, was a Republican candidate both for Attorney General and the United States Senate, has represented a number of very interesting and varied personalities in, of course, the Oklahoma City bombing defendant, Timothy McVeigh, Abby Hoffman, and he has represented all three governors, all three Republican governors at one time or another. We're pleased to have Stephen join us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kent. It's my privilege to be here.
Stephen, how do you describe your activities today? What is Stephen Jones doing?
I'm out of politics and practicing law. And So I think politics is a wonderful game. It's even better if you're not a candidate. You can just watch your friends, and of course, practice of law is always challenging.
What type of cases are you pursuing or do you accept?
Litigation, or some of my clients, no litigation. They don't want a fair trial, they don't want a trial at all. I think most litigation lawyers are specializing in avoidance of litigation. But sometimes you can't avoid it, so it's half criminal, half civil, and half in federal court and half in state court, all over the state and occasionally outside the state.
How were you chosen to be Timothy McVeigh's attorney?
Boy, I wish I knew the answer to that. I was drafted. I wasn't a volunteer, and Judge Russell called me at home on Friday night, May the 5th, and said he'd talk with the other judges, and he had a question to ask me, and he asked me if I would agree to accept an appointment if they offered it. And I said, well, I'd like to think about it for 24 hours, and I did, and called him back and told him the answer was yes, and so he appointed me.
Because that was a lengthy commitment. I mean, you knew this wasn't going to be, 5 days or 7 days in court. This was going to be a significant commitment of your life.
It was 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So,
and 24
yes.
hours is all you bought yourself to think about it.
I was glad I had the 24 hours, and it was then another 24 hours before he announced it publicly.
But you had a choice.
I had a choice.
Okay.
How difficult was it for you to make that decision? I mean, you knew that you were basically giving up for a period of time the other aspects of your practice of law to devote full time to that case.
I can't say that it was difficult. I knew instantly when he asked me what they were trying to do. They wanted an Oklahoma lawyer, as it turned out, to represent Mr. McVeigh. As you know, Mike Tiger represented Terry Nichols. So, and that was an objective that I was in accord with. I mean, I could see why they wanted that. But while I'd been involved in controversial cases, I didn't think I'd been involved in cases where my wife or children or home were at risk, or even the building where I practiced law. So I thought I should check with some of those people before I told him that I would do it. In my own mind, I didn't have a problem with it.
And how did that decision ultimately affect your practice? Is it better today than it was before? Or can you weigh it?
It destroyed the practice. I can't complain about that. I mean, I can't say that it was because I represented Tim McVeigh, although I'm sure that was part of it. But it was the fact that you have, I don't know how many clients we had at the time, but let's say 100. You have to quickly find other lawyers for them, and then you take on this case, and while you're paid for doing it, when it ends or they stop paying you is not your decision, it's their decision. So when they stop, then you have to start over again, and it's just like graduating from law school and hanging out your shingle and starting again. There was a certain notoriety in being Mr. McVeigh's lawyer, and I suppose that attracted some clients, but by the same token, I'm sure it drove others away. So it started over, and it took about 5 or 6 years to get back to where it was.
During that time period, without getting into anything that's confidential, did you have any personal fear for your safety or the safety of your family or people close to you?
Well, I mean, sometimes advocacy requires one to be vulnerable even unto death, but the courts, in particular Judge Mage, were very generous with adequate security arrangements, both at my house and at my office. I was too much on the go to worry too much about myself, but people that had a daily routine that come to the office or come to my house, I thought they might be at some risk, and there were a few incidents, but nothing came of them. But it was, I didn't wonder what to do next. I mean, I always had an agenda.
It took up about 2.5 years of your life. How much of that was pre-trial work, and then how much of that was during the trial, and how much of that was post-trial?
Kent, the trial started on March the 31st, 1997, 10 years ago, and lasted until about the middle of June. I withdrew in August when the appeals were formulated. I came in May, so I came about 6 months before he was indicted, maybe 5 months before he was indicted. So we had roughly almost 2 years before trial.
What was your first impression of McVeigh when you met him? Now, I'm not asking you to disclose conversations. But How did you find him when you met him?
Thinner than I thought, and certainly much more friendly and outgoing, extroverted than the image that you saw, what I call the Noble County walkout or the perp walk. That gave a very stern, people in the Marine Corps and Army have called it the 1,000-yard stare. In private meetings, that was not Tim McVeigh at all. And he was not an extrovert, he was not a loner. He had a sense of humor, and quite frankly, he described this, so I'm not telling you anything I shouldn't, he imagined himself and called himself a terrorist. He never referred to himself as a mass murderer or a murderer, but as a terrorist. And he believed in that ideology and made it clear to me that he believed in it. And when he was interviewed by Ed Bradley, he said that.
You wrote extensively about the experience. Why did you write about it? Are you glad you wrote about it? And what's been the perceptions based on the book? What feedback have you got?
There are two books. There's the book before he waived the attorney-client privilege, which does not, as Ken says, does not go into any confidential matter, and is basically a description of this is how the trial worked. These were the issues in the trial. This was the judge, probably more written for lawyers than anybody else, because it was a unique trial. Then after he waived the attorney-client privilege, by the 75 hours of on-the-record interviews that he gave the two reporters, and after the Bar Association and Judge Maitch and all those people had decided that he waived the attorney-client privilege, I thought that his contribution to the book American Terrorist was a piece of fiction and so distorted the reality of what was involved, not to mention some personal or professional attacks on me, that I should answer it because I thought it would leave a terribly skewed picture of the bombing and the trial. However, in answer to your first question, am I glad I wrote it? You know, I have to say, really, I'm not. I now understand what Sir Edward Clark meant, who was Oscar Wilde's lawyer in his 3 trials. When Sir Edward wrote his memoirs, he never mentioned once that he had represented Oscar Wilde. I think I understand why.
We need to take a break. We're visiting with Stephen Jones. You're watching The Verdict, and we'll be right back.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Shining is taking responsibility. At Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma, we know managing your health care can be overwhelming, and it's our job to help you meet the challenge. By guiding, supporting, and showing the way, we encourage you to gain control. Because we believe the best tool we can give you is the confidence to take charge. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Oklahoma, shining through.
That land next door was a mess. Take more than a lawnmower to revive that land. I heard the oil and natural gas people was cleaning up old oil sites, and it wouldn't cost us a plug nickel. Oh yes, sir, it was quite a revival. The whole church showed up, want to make a playground for the kids. It sure is a blessing.
Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
You would never give your 8-year-old daughter the keys to the car, but when you give her the computer keys, she can go anywhere in the world, some very dangerous places.
Every day, 1 in 5 children is approached online by a potential predator.
That's why Cox Communications makes it easy for parents to control what content their children can access. To learn more, visit cox.com/takecharge.
I'm proud to partner with Cox to safeguard our nation's children. Know where your child is going online. Remember, you're in the driver's seat.
Gather round. It's time to share Boomerang, the network dedicated to classic cartoons. Television your family can watch together. Cox Communications brings your kids the characters they love. So sit down with your loved ones. It's time to share Boomerang.
Came home! Now, Boomerang is on Cox. Catch your favorite cartoons on Cox Digital Channel 148.
We're back on The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're visiting with attorney Stephen Jones. Timothy McVeigh, your most well-known client, and I'm sure that's fresh on the minds of a lot of Oklahomans. What other cases through the years draw people's attention?
Well, as Ken said, I had the privilege of representing each of the three Republican governors, Mr. Bellman, Mr. Bartlett, and Mr. Keating at various times in their career. I represented Abby Hoffman, who is a name probably familiar to people over 60, such as myself. I'm not sure how many people younger recognize it, but Abby was a prominent radical anti-Vietnam War yippie. One of the Chicago 7 defendants, represented or assisted in the representation of Father Philip Berrigan, a Catholic peace activist. The page, Jordan Edmond, that was involved in the investigation into Congressman Mark Foley, and I represented the Republican Party. And perhaps ironically, Gus Hall and Angela Davis. And they were the Communist Party candidates for president and vice president some years ago. They didn't get on the ballot in Oklahoma, though.
Well, Stephen, that leads me to ask you something that our viewers might be wondering about. You're a lifelong Republican. You've run as a Republican a couple of 3 times, have stellar Republican credentials. How do you reconcile that with leading the ACLU's legal work in Oklahoma for a while, representing Berrigan and Hoffman and the like, as who would probably not subscribe to Republican principles?
No, I think that's probably true. Well, I think lawyers have a duty, and you're a lawyer, Ken, and I think lawyers, we recognize, have a duty to represent persons when asked to represent them. There's no conflict, and they can pay for the services, or you do it pro bono, and we have a duty to occasionally represent controversial and unpopular causes. That's one of the things that makes our profession unique. When I was general counsel for the ACLU in Oklahoma in the early 70s, people were on the board like Edith Gaylord Harper, Mr. Gaylord's sister, Don Emery, who was the general counsel of Phillips Petroleum Company at that time, Merton Bulla, who'd missed being elected mayor of Oklahoma City by 1 vote, kind of moderate, left of center, maybe right of center. I think the ACLU is a different organization today than it was, say, 35 years ago. So I didn't see the clash. I mean, to me, part of my republicanism in limited government, and a lot of Republicans believe in limited government in the economic sphere, but they're willing to give law enforcement more power, and I don't think you can be a true conservative unless you believe that there have to be rules and limits on government in both spheres. So to me, it's not inconsistent.
Well, and comment a little bit for our viewers on something that may be obvious but may not be. You can represent clients without necessarily subscribing to their personal views.
Absolutely. As I said a moment ago, I represented Philip Berrigan, Father Berrigan. I worked for Richard Nixon, represented Frank Keating, and also Tim McVeigh. The lawyer is a professional person, just like a doctor. If you're in the emergency room and Tim McVeigh is brought in, or I'm just reading Vincent Bugliosi's book, some of the same doctors that worked to save John Kennedy's life also worked to save Lee Harvey Oswald's life. It's a different profession, but the principle of serving the public is the same, and that's one of the great glories of the legal profession in this country.
You worked for Donald Rumsfeld. What do you think his legacy will be?
I think his legacy is very much like Lyndon Johnson's, that he will be remembered for one thing, almost to the exclusion of everything else. In Mr. Johnson's case, it's the Vietnam War. In Mr. Rumsfeld's case, it's the Iraq War. But Mr. Rumsfeld is a man of unusual intelligence and leadership and ability, and it's unfortunate that he will probably be remembered for that, because he actually was a very good member of Congress. He was one of the people that helped Jerry Ford climb up to leadership, served as Mr. Ford's chief of staff, ambassador to NATO, director of the Office of Economic Opportunity, and a leader in private enterprise. And it's unfortunate that probably he will be remembered out of proportion for Iraq than other things.
You also worked along with Richard Nixon. At what phase of Nixon's career were you involved?
Mr. Nixon had just been defeated for governor of California. He had moved to New York City and joined this firm. And he wrote me, and he'd read something that I had written and asked me if I would be interested in being his research assistant, and if so, drop out of law school and come to New York and work with him.
What had you written that would have impressed him so much?
I'd written an article that actually Richard Nixon had carried Texas in 1960 over Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Johnson, and explained why that was so. And at that time, there was some idea being given to a book that Earl Mazo would write. It was the political editor of the New York Times, that took as its theme that Mr. Nixon won, not Mr. Kennedy. Well, after the president's assassination on that terrible day in Dallas, there was obviously no market for that book. But nevertheless, Mr. Nixon had this paper that I had written, and it attracted his attention, and he asked me to join him. So I did.
What'd you do with Nelson Rockefeller?
Mr. Rockefeller employed me to work on his presidential campaign in 1964 in Oklahoma. As you can imagine, there wasn't a lot of support. And then I worked in his offices in New York and met him on several occasions, and his associates. I introduced him when he came to Enid as vice president, and he and Mr. Nixon were heroes of mine.
Let me ask you, we know, at least in recent years, what the most high-profile case is that you've had. Over your career, what's the case that you enjoyed the most, where you had the most fun? The most fun? I think winning a not guilty verdict in a criminal case where clearly the odds are stacked against the defendant, but the defendant is innocent. It's not that he's not guilty, he's innocent. It's just circumstances that point the finger of suspicion at him. And the more difficult the case, or the more challenging, the more serious it is to the person or the ones. The one that disturbed me the greatest was I represented a young man, 16 years old, that shot his mother and father in cold blood, killed them. And there was no defense. And that was the case, I think, that probably troubled me more than any others, even more than Mr. McVeigh. Let me ask you, in the last couple of minutes we have, do you have any plans to run for political office again?
No. They may not have found a cure for AIDS, but let me tell you, I found a cure for staying out of politics. I'll leave that to Mick and others. It's great to have your friends in it, and obviously after representing Mr. McVeigh, not many of my friends called me. I actually went 4 years without a single campaign contribution being requested, but they've ganged up on me since then.
What's left for Stephen Jones? What have you not done that you'd still like to do?
I'd like to go to Yalta, where the Crimean Conference was held in 1945. I can't really say, Mick, that there's much that's left undone that I wanted to do.
How do you want Oklahomans to remember Stephen Jones as your professional legacy?
Well, I hope my professional legacy is that lawyers have a duty to represent the controversial and the unpopular, that we have to make that a meaningful part of our responsibility. And we have to do it without one arm being tied behind our back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen Jones, thanks very much for being on The Verdict.
Thank you, Mayor.
Kent and I will have a final word when we return.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens. to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
Our pledge as a company is to provide quality of service for our paying customers. When you illegally hook up cable,
everyone pays.
Theft of cable can cause outages.
Sometimes poor reception.
We seek out illegal use.
and we prosecute offenders.
If you know someone not paying for service,
call us at 1-800-466-5590.
You could remain anonymous.
Cable theft. It's more serious than you think. It's a crime.
Hi, honey. You've got to check this out.
What? What are we listening to?
I had digital phone service installed today.
It sounds just like before.
I know, but it's going to save us a ton of money.
With Cox Digital Telephone, you'll save big every month. Keep your same phone number and get your favorite calling features. Just pay less.
That does sound good.
You should hear the upstairs phone.
We're back on The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Camp Myers, wrapping up the show with Stephen Jones.
Yeah, our thanks to Stephen who's spent time with us talking about his career. He's had a fascinating career. It's not all over. He'll have a lot of more fascinating things to do in the future, but we have a little lighter show next week with Coach Barry Switzer.
Look forward to it. In the meantime, go to our website, theverdict.tv. Tell us about a show you'd like to see right here on The Verdict. For Camp Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next week on The Verdict.
The preceding program was produced by the Production Services Group at Cox Communications, exclusively for the Cox Channel.